Yeah, I'm here with the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare, and we are just wrapping up a study that we did looking at how we can get more local food onto patient plates in hospitals as well as cafeteria meals. So I'll start out by thanking the following for the support to make this project happen. The Ontario Trillium Foundation, who funded the project, and CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, who helped us secure the funding. The YMCA Youth Eco Internship Program and My Sustainable Canada, who provided us with some very valuable labor in pulling this project together. And finally, St. Mary's General Hospital for letting us spend a lot of time looking at their facility and their food systems. So I'll touch briefly on the benefits of local food, although I'm sure a lot of people here know what they are. I'll move into why we think it's a good match for healthcare, and then talk about the study results. So in general, the environmental benefits of local food are probably the most touted. There's a study done actually by the region of Waterloo, the regional health authority, that determined that if you sit down to eat a plate of food here, the ingredients on that plate have traveled on average about 4,500 kilometers, which is a remarkable distance for food to be traveling whenever we have so much green space in the area. So obviously, if you're eating local food, then you're going to be eating food from nearby, and you hear a lot about the 100-mile diet, which is obviously in kind. There's also well-known economic impacts, because when you're shopping for local food, you're supporting local farms and local farmers. And as we heard earlier, whenever you put money into local businesses, those dollars stay put. So there's a lot of rural revitalization that happens whenever you shop locally rather. And then there's also lesser known social impacts, such as strengthened local food supply chains, because as we start to ask for more local food, it becomes more available as demand increases. Along with that is improved food security, which is basically safe, secure access to food in a time of a crisis. So if the food supply chains are strong, in a time of a crisis, there's more secure access to food. Lastly, there's marginal nutritional benefits to local. If you're eating a red pepper from California, it's going to travel all that distance to get here. That shelf life allows vitamins and minerals to decay, like vitamin A, vitamin E. So if you're eating local food, then in general, it's going to be slightly more nutritious. So why hospitals? Why local food for hospitals? Well, there's a lot of support for this right now. The Ontario government is committed to investing $24 million into finding ways to get more local food onto plates in public institutions. To date, this is focused mainly in schools to get students eating healthy, thinking healthy. But it makes sense in hospitals as well, because there's no reason for hospitals to have a bad reputation for food, because food is as much treatment as health services. Hospitals have remarkable buying power. In just hospitals alone, there's just under 33 million meals served every year. And if we can make a small percentage of that local, then the amount of money staying in the local economies and the provincial economy will just go through the roof. And lastly, hospitals should be a role model for healthy living and healthy eating. And they should approach food as treatment rather than just sustenance, because it's important when you're in a hospital to feel at home and well and comfortable, and a lot of that is proper food, fresh food. So our broad project research objectives were to look at the practicality, cost-benefit, health and environmental benefits of getting more local food into patient meals and cafeteria meals at hospitals. And we used a survey to get those details. And it wasn't a representative sample. This was a relatively small survey. So it's just essentially a snapshot of food systems and where the opportunities lie for local food. And what we were really intrigued by was whether there was a difference between long-term care facilities, so places like nursing homes, retirement homes, compared to acute care facilities like your general hospitals, St. Mary's, Cambridge Memorial, Grand River, for example. Because the belief is that the long-term care facilities where you spend a lot more time, obviously you're exposed to the food for longer periods, so usually they have better facilities for preparing fresh food. So we sent out 50 surveys to healthcare facilities, 25 hospitals, 25 long-term care facilities, and we selected them based on geographic representation. There's networks called LHINs, Local Health Integration Networks, and there's 14 across the province, and we use those to select our candidates. We also wanted to select a wide range of size, so the smallest facility was actually 18 beds in Northern Ontario, and then ones in between all the way up to facilities in Southern Ontario with more than 800 beds. And we targeted food service managers for the surveys because they're the ones that are making the key decisions in the food planning. Our response rate was fantastic. We got 33 back out of the 50, which is 66%. And for a survey like that, it's very strong. You usually expect about 20. And it really speaks to the fact that people are motivated to see these kinds of changes coming about, which is really inspiring. 13 of those were long-term care, 19 were general hospitals. And if you do the math, it obviously doesn't add up to 32, but that's because one was unnamed. So the results, I'll speak about hospitals first. And to be honest, the situation for hospitals is pretty bleak. They have a very limited capacity to procure local as we stand right now. Most of that comes from their limited capacity for fresh. So out of the 19 general hospitals we heard back from, 4 of those had 0 kitchen at all. No stove, no pots, no pans, not even a microwave. So they had no ability to bring in fresh food and put it onto patients' plates. In addition to that, 4 of those facilities had limited kitchens. So that would be maybe a stove, but no oven, or maybe pots and pans in an oven, but no stove. So they have slightly more capacity to prepare fresh food, but the flexibility is quite low. One of the other barriers was that they have very long menu cycles. They engage with food suppliers for contracts between 1 to 3 years, and that's usually the length of the menu cycle. So the ability to accommodate seasonal fluctuations in food is very, very low. And lastly, because they're not preparing fresh food, they've moved to bulk food systems, kind of like airplane food, where either they are buying the food in bulk from their food supplier and just assembling it on site, or they're just getting their foods prepared at a central commissary, shipped in trucks, and refrigerated on site where it's reheated en masse. And what that does is that puts the onus on the suppliers to start procuring local rather than the hospitals. So their decision-making, the power has been taken out of their hands. And I'll touch briefly on St. Mary's General Hospital because we did a case study on them. And despite their strong motivation to see change happen, they're strong advocates for green healthcare. They've done a lot with respect to local food. They've hosted a farmers market for 2 years. Excuse me. They're developing a local food day program where they'll feature local foods in the lobby for staff and visitors to purchase. But despite all their motivation to make these changes come about, they still can't get local onto the plates. And that's because they don't have a kitchen, they don't have the staff to prepare the meals if they could bring in local, and they have the bulk food systems. However, on the other side, the long-term care facilities is a little more optimistic. They have a much higher capacity for local food. They, for the most part, have seasonal menus, so those will change either twice to 3 to 4 times a year. Which really lets you sneak in local ingredients. So if in the summertime you have cucumber, then it can be local, and if you go into the wintertime, you can start selecting for winter vegetables and stuff like that. A large percentage of the food was prepared fresh and on site, so the bulk food systems weren't really present in the long-term care facilities. It's more conventional cooking, the way you and I cook at home. They all had well-equipped kitchens for the most part, and what was really impressive was that they had set the precedent for local food and policy. None of the hospitals had any local food policies, but the long-term care facilities, 3 of them had official local food policies, and they also knew of suppliers who had local food policies. So this says that, 1, they're leaders in this field, that they're setting it in action and they're making it come about, and they're also demanding it from their suppliers who are falling in line. And this is something that I think the general hospitals, it's a lesson that they can learn. And they're more optimistic that this change can come about. So we asked all the respondents what they thought the likelihood was that in the next 5 years there'd be more local food on their plates. And the long-term care facilities generally said that it was medium to high, whereas on the general hospital side, it was no likelihood to low. We also asked about their values, so the food service managers, what their values were, what their opinions were with respect to food. And what we found was that when it comes to decision-making, food is food. The social, the environmental dimensions, all those intangible benefits of local, they don't matter whenever it comes down to decision-making. What does matter is the safety, so they have to be fully certified. They have to be nutritious because they have very strict benchmarks to meet for patients. And they have to be appealing to the senses, so taste, texture, appearance, all of that. So basically, if you have a nice local fresh lettuce and you have lettuce from California that's fully certified, the local lettuce has to be on par with the conventionally sourced food. There is also a perceived increase in labor and cost associated with local food, which is a barrier that's going to have to be overcome. It's possible that labor would increase and make sense if you're bringing in fresh food to a system where you don't prepare anything on site. Then obviously you need someone to cut it, prepare it, plate it, serve it, all of that. And then the issue of cost isn't necessarily validated. There's not really anything to say that buying local produce is more expensive than buying through suppliers. So what's next? For the hospitals, the biggest next logical step is to engage suppliers. So this is the Cisco's, the Aramarks, the Sodexo's, all these large corporate food providers, getting them to start offering local alternatives so that we can fit procuring local into the system as it exists right now. Obviously, the best solution would be to just change the system in general, have hospitals regain the capacity to prepare fresh food. But another important step will be making a business case for local food. We believe that if food is fresh and tastier, people are going to finish a higher percentage of their meals, and that means that the organic waste that has to be thrown out from the facilities will go down, and it's possible that actually the cost will balance out. And lastly, cafeteria initiatives, I think, is a great place to start. We are exploring opportunities with St. Mary's and St. Joe's in Guelph to run some pilot projects in their cafeterias to maybe feature local food more prominently. And once we get our foot in the door, we hope to expand that to the patient care side, but there's obviously more barriers there. And lastly, this was just a general sort of broad look at things. But the next step that's already underway is a much larger project that we just got funding for from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, as well as the University of Guelph. And this is a 3-year project where we're going to expand the scope. We're going to go to all 250 hospitals in Ontario. We're actually not going to look at the long-term care facilities. But we're going to go into much more detail. The survey is much expanded. We're going to do interviews, focus groups, and we're going to come up with strategies to really get some change happening in hospitals. How does that?